Daf Yomi, Tractate Avodah Zarah, Avodah, page 22a. Top of the page with the words Arisuta. Le Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Let la le. Arisuta, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, let le. Goy my time muta. The Gemara answers Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar does not accept the principle the sharecropper works for his tenancy rather than as a Jew's employee. Now, just a disclaimer, in the past, few dafim or so, or there's been a lot of daf or so, whatever. It's a lot of what seems like sectarian or like prejudice kind of stuff. Jews, Gentiles. I don't want anyone who's listening to this to be offended by it, so I'm saying that whatever I'm reading, it's not my own opinion, nor do I necessarily agree with whatever's being stated. I'm just simply reading the content. Also bear in mind, please, that that back then there was a lot more animosity. I mean, there's tons of animosity today between against the Jews, but then it might have been even worse. At least you have a lot of so-called civilized countries, America, Canada, whatever, Australia, that are civil to just everybody. It's a human kind of decency, but there's a lot of decencies, common courtesies back then that wasn't even in place. So I do think overall the world has progressed, even though we see, as we see in the media, but today a lot of anti-Semitism and stuff. But the point is that if you hear any content of like discrimination against Gentiles, just know that it's not me saying it; it's just the Talmud is saying it. Thank you. The Gemara answers: Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar does not accept the principle that a sharecropper works for his tenancy rather as the Jew's employee. The Gemara asks, but if so, with regard to a Gentile, what is the reason that it is permitted to rent to him? We had a discussion whether it was even permitted to rent to a non-Jew. That's obviously not true today, because plenty of Jews rent to non-Jewish people. So, it looks like we don't even go by this these days. So, the Gemara answers that we say to him that he may not perform labor on certain days, and he complies. The Gemara asks, if that is so, then in the case of a Samaritan as well, we can say to him that he may not perform labor on certain days, and he will comply. The Gemara answers, a Samaritan will not comply, as he says, I am more learned than you, and I know that it is permitted to work on these days. תפוגלי משום לפני בעל עשיתי מכשול חדה ועוד כאמר חדה משום לפני עיוור ועוד מפני שנקרס על שמו. The Gemara asks, if that is so, why does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar state specifically that the reason for the prohibition is because the field is called by the name of the owner? Let him derive this halakha due to the fact that the Samaritan, like the Jew, is commanded to refrain from labor during the intermediate days of the festival. Excuse me for a moment, I have to plug this in, and I'll be right back. The Gemara asks, if that is so, does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar... Okay, we'll start from that when we come back. Okay, back at... the Gemara asks, if that is so, why does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar state specifically that the reason for the prohibition is because the field is called by the name of the owner? Let him derive this halakha due to the fact that the Samaritan, like the Jew, is commanded to refrain from labor during the intermediate days of the festival, and since he will not work on these days, renting him a field is included in the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. Leviticus 19:14. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar states one reason and adds another. One reason is that Of the prohibition, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, and furthermore, it is prohibited because the field is called by the name of the owner. Hanu mori koi de goy naka beshabda v'Israel b'chad beshabda to lekamed rav shagalahu. The Gemara relates that there were certain saffron growers, Borikai, who jointly owned a field in an arrangement according to which a Gentile took possession of the field and worked in it on Shabbat, and a Jew took possession of it on Sunday. They came before Rava to find out if they could divide their profits equally, and Rava permitted them to do so. לא יאמר ישראל לגוי טול חלקך לשבת ואני בכל ואם היתנו מתחילה מותר. Ravina raised an objection to the ruling of Rava from a Braita. In the case of a Jew and a Gentile received tenancy of a field in partnership with the understanding that they were to work the field and receive part of its produce exchange, the Jew may not say to the Gentile, take your portion of the profit for your work on Shabbat, and I will take my portion of my work on one of the days of the rest of the week. The reason one may not do so is that it turns out that when the Gentile worked on Shabbat, he was laboring partly on behalf of his Jewish partner. But if they initially stipulated when they entered into their partnership that the Gentile would receive a share of the profit in exchange for his work on Shabbat, and the Jew would receive a share for the work that he performs during one of the days of the week, it is permitted. And if they did not make this stipulation, and later came to calculate the number of weekdays for which the Jew should receive the profit corresponding to the number of Shabbatot that the Gentile worked, it is prohibited, as this would mean that when the Gentile worked on Shabbat, he was working on behalf of the Jew. Rava was embarrassed that he had ruled incorrectly. Ultimately, the matter was revealed that the saffron growers had stipulated from the outset that this was the arrangement, and therefore, even according to the Braita, Rava had ruled correctly. Rav Gevia Bekatila Mao Hadashatina Neola Have Goya Khilishne Neola Iswa Shne Yatero Asuleka Mederava Shalehu. Rav Gevia from Bei Ketil said, I wonder if this is the first time we have. I don't remember this. Rav Gevia from Bei Ketil. I gotta check this out. When did he show up? Do you remember him? Rav Gevia from Bei Ketil? I don't remember him. Every once in a while, the Talmud will present some interesting Amoraic names that it might be just a one-timer. I remember one in Gittin was Eliezer Nuyot Da'ah. I think Eliezer Nuyot Da'ah appears only one time in all of Shas. And there are several like that. They only appear one time in all of Shas. Yeah. Okay, Rav Gevia Bei Ketil Amar. Hanu Shadil Neola Hagoya Khilishne Rav Gevia from Bei Ketil said that the incident was actually as follows. The Jew and the Gentile formed a partnership with regard to those orla saplings to tend to them and sell them. The Gentile would work and profit from them during the orla years, the first 3 years after the tree is planted, when it is prohibited for a Jew to eat its fruit. A Jew would work and profit from them during the years where the fruit is permitted. They came to Rava, who permitted them to do so. The Gemara asks, but didn't Ravina object to the ruling issued by Rava? The Gemara answers, no. Ravina's intention was to provide a support for the ruling of Rava. The Gemara asks, but wasn't Rava embarrassed by Ravina's statement? The Gemara answers, that never happened. Okay. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If the partners did not specify that the Gentile would work on Shabbat and the Jew during the week, but they also did not calculate their profits so that they would split the earnings equally, what is the halacha? The Gemara attempts to provide an answer from the Braita. Come and hear. If they initially stipulated that the Gentile would receive a share of the profit exchanged for the work on Shabbat, while a Jew would receive a share for the work on one of the other days of the week as permitted, this indicates without specification it is prohibited. Ema seifa, tell me the seifa. Say the last clause. Im bal cheshbon asur hastamamuta elama me'aleka mashma mina. So the Gemara rejects this proof and says, say the last clause. If they came to calculate their profits, it is prohibited. This indicates that without specification, doing so is permitted. The Gemara concludes, rather, no inferences to be learned from this Braita, as the inferences contradict each other. May we return to you, chapter before their festivals, and now we start the next chapter of Ein Mamidim. Zok, and we're in the last line of the Amudim. Ein Mamidim behema mipunda koi shel goyim mipnei shechashu navio velo yaridi sheimahem mipnei shechashu navayos lo yisyach edam lemohen mipnei chashudin al shechas damin. One may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality, since even Gentiles are prohibited from engaging in bestiality. A Jew who places an animal there is guilty of violating the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. Leviticus 19:14. And a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations. And any person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they're suspected of bloodshed. See what I'm saying? There's a lot of animosity between the two back then. Maybe now as well. But in many ways not. Chav Beis and Beis. Return to 22b. Uraminu, I will ask you a contradiction. Uraminu, Elohim Elokim Im Chayshim, Ein Chayshim Mishum Hovea, Elo Mishum Nirva, Elo Mishum Muktiv, Elo Mishum Nirva. With regard to the assumption that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality, the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Braita Tosefta 2:1. One may purchase an animal from Gentiles for use as an offering, and there is no concern that it might be due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to his being an animal that was object of bestiality, or due to it having been set aside for idol worship, due to the animal itself having been worshipped. A little break here, and we shall be right back. God willing. Okay, where was I? Where were we? Looks like we had just turned the page. You know what? Let's start the new Mishnah. Now we finished the chapter. We're starting a new chapter. I think we started this. Let's start from the Mishnah here. The Mishnah on 22. I think we read that already. Okay. We're in the top. Let's just start from the top of 22b. The top of 22 with the Talmud. You know what? We probably did this, but I'm just going to go back anyway. Let's just go back to the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah in the bottom of 22a, I'm sorry, 22a. The Mishnah in the new parak, Ein Mamidin. Ein Mamidin be'em b'pudna koi shel goy, mipnei shechashud na l'bi'o. V'lo yiziyach l'shimohem, mipnei shechashud na l'oez. V'lo yiziyach l'odrim, mipnei shechashud na l'shechadami. One may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they're suspected of bestiality, since even Gentiles are forbidden from engaging in bestiality. A Jew who places his animal there, this is like back then, maybe not today, is guilty of violating the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. Leviticus 19:14, and a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations. And any person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they are suspected of bloodshed. And now we turn to 22b. I will ask you a contradiction with regard to the assumption of that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality. Back then, that was the case. Let's say in those particular Gentiles in that particular area, some 1800 years ago. The Gemara raises a contradiction from a Braita and Tosefta 2:1. One may purchase an animal from Gentiles for use as an offering, and there is no concern that it might be unfit due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to it being an animal that was the object of bestiality, or due to it having been set aside for idol worship, or due to the animal itself having been worshipped. Goy chas al behemto shelo te'akel. The Gemara analyzes this ruling. Granted, there is no concern that the animal was set aside for idolatry or was itself worshipped. The reason is that if it is so that it was set aside, or if it was so that it was worshipped, then the Gentile would not have sold it to the Jew in the first place. But with regard to the possibility that it is an animal that copulated with a person, or an animal that was the object of bestiality, let one raise a concern in line with the ruling of the Mishnah. The Gemara explains, Rav Tachlifa says, that Rav Shela Bar Avina says, in the name of Ra, a Gentile protects and thereby spares his own animal so that it will not become barren. Apparently, they had this, I don't know if this is scientifically true, or at least maybe they believed it to be true, or maybe it happened a couple times, and then because of that, they thought it was true. But apparently there's some kind of idea, pseudoscience, that if an animal was involved in bestiality with a human being, then it would become barren. I don't know if that's actually physically, scientifically true, but that's what they're saying here. So maybe they believe that to be true. Anyway, there is no concern that the Gentile engage in immoral behavior with it, because after all, it was his animal, and he wanted to bear more animals, so he wouldn't have relations with the animal because he wants it to be still, bear children or offspring. Therefore, one may use an animal purchased from a Gentile as an offering. Hatenach nekevos zecharim ma'ikalememao. Interesting. That's sort of asking now that, okay, now we're getting to some technical bestiality stuff. So again, just take this with a grain of salt. Don't shoot me. I'm just a messenger. I'm just the reader of it. We'll have to go through this a little quickly, but basically they're saying here that female animals would become barren, but if someone wants to have a male relationship with an animal, then males may not. Maybe it was never bearing fruit, bearing offspring, I should say. I mean, they could have said, if they wanted to take this thing further, they could have just said that, if you're going with an urban myth or legend, you could just say that, having relations with a male animal would make it sterile also. I mean, why not go? But anyway, fine, maybe not. All right, so Zachar Michael Mimmer Amar Rav Kahana Oil Machishim Bebaso. Okay. Rav Kahana says the Gentiles also refrain from engaging in bestiality with their male livestock, since doing so deteriorates the animal's flesh and makes them physically weaker. Okay, maybe. How would they know? They must have tried it, huh? Rather, the Gemara instead raises a contradiction from that which is taught in Braita. One may purchase an animal for use as an offering from their shepherd, meaning a Gentile shepherd. The Gemara explains that the apparent contradiction in light of the ruling of the Mishnah led us to be concerned that perhaps he engaged in bestiality with the animal as it does not belong to him. Therefore, it should be prohibited to purchase an animal from Gentile shepherds. The Gemara answers their shepherd is fearful of engaging in bestiality with the animals under his care due to the forfeit of his wages that would result if this were discovered. Okay. Rather, the Gemara instead raised the contradiction from that which is taught in the Braita. One may not deliver an animal to their shepherd, meaning a Gentile shepherd. The Gemara explains the contradiction. Why may one not do so? Let us say that their shepherd is fearful due to the forfeit of his wages, and accordingly, one should be permitted to give him an animal. Maratiti Amaraba Hainu Damri Inchi Michtava Gilala Beza Regala Bechavre Yada. The Gemara answers with regard to themselves, meaning other Gentiles, as they are aware of each other's actions, they are fearful that they may be caught, and therefore will not engage in bestiality with an animal belonging to another Gentile. But with regard to ourselves, Jews, as we are not aware of them and their behavior, they are not fearful of us. The Gemara notes that Rabbah said this is in accordance with the adage that people say, just as the stylus etches script upon marble, a sinner knows his fellow sinner, meaning a transgressor is acutely aware of others who act in the same manner. Okay. The Gemara raises a difficulty. If that is so, and the reason one may purchase an animal for use as an offering from a Gentile is that engaging in bestiality has negative impact on the animal, then let us not purchase the male animals from female Gentiles, as we should be concerned that perhaps she engaged in bestiality with it. This would not damage the animal or render it barren, and therefore there is no deterrent that would prevent a Gentile woman from doing so. Your answers, since if she were to engage in bestiality, the animal would follow her around in public, and she is afraid of the others discovering her behavior. Okay. Ella Halitanav Yosef Aralta Lo Tarvi Kalba Velo Tishri Barbe Rav Biushbiza Bishlomo Barbe Rav Tziniela The Gemara further asks, but consider that which Rabbi Yosef teaches. A widow may not raise a dog due to the suspicion that she may engage in bestiality. And she may not allow a student of Torah to dwell as a lodger in her home. Granted, it makes sense that she is prohibited for her to have a student of Torah lodging in her home, as he is regarded as discreet in her eyes, so she will not be deterred from sitting with him. But with regard to a dog, since it would follow her around after she mates with it, she's afraid to engage in bestiality with it. Therefore, it should be permitted for her to raise a dog. Okay. Kiva nechisha dirle umza masriach abasre beimar amrin shihach masriach basre mishum umza dika masriach. The Gemara answers, since it will follow her around in a case where she throws it a piece of meat, people will say the fact that it is following her is due to the meat that she threw it, and they will not suspect her of bestiality. Consequently, she will not be deterred from transgressing. Nekevos, Eitzon nekevos, my time in Amachayach dinan, Amar mar ukva barchama. מפני שהגויים מצויים אצל נשי חבריהם, ופעמים שאינו מוצא ומוצא את בהמה ורובעה. The Gemara asks, with regard to female animals, with females, what is the reason that we do not permit them to be secluded with each other? Mar Ukva Barchama says it is because Gentiles frequent the wives of others, and on occasion the Gentile does not find her, and he finds the animal and engages in bestiality with it instead. Okay. Damar Yohanan, Bisha Sheba Nachash al Chava, Hitil Ba Zuhama. Ihachi Yisrael, Nami Yisrael, Shalom Har Sinai. Pascha Zuhamasan, Goim, Shilo Amdu al Har Sinai, Lo Pascha, Zuhamasan. If you wish, say instead. Even when he finds the wife, he also engages in bestiality with the animal. As the master said, the animal of a Jew is more appealing to Gentiles than their own wives. And how would they know? Okay, anyway, alright, whatever. As Rabbi Yochanan says, at the time when the snake came upon Eve, at the time of the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, it infected her with moral contamination. And this contamination lingers in all human beings. The Gemara asks, if that is so, a Jew should also be suspected of engaging in bestiality. The Gemara answers, with regard to the Jewish people who stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah, their contamination ended, whereas in the case of Gentiles who did not stand on Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, their contamination has not ended.
אני ראיתי גוי שלקח אבז מן השוק, רבעה, חנקה, צילאה ואכלה.
Oh my goodness. He's watched all that?
Oh my goodness. אמר רבי ינון מדיפתי, אני ראיתי ערבי אחד שלקח ירח מן השוק וחגג בה כדי רבייה, רבעה, צילאה ואכלה.
Alright, this is a little crazy, but I'm just going to read it because it's part of the program. The Gemara inquires with regard to the halacha in the case of a bird. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to birds. What is the halacha? Are Gentiles suspected of engaging in bestiality with birds? The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof that they are indeed suspected of doing so. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, I guess Rabbi Chanina saw this, right? Yehuda says that Shmuel says, in the name of I once saw a Gentile who bought a goose in the market, engaged in bestiality with it, strangled it, roasted, and then ate it. And similarly, Rabbi Yirmiyah Difti says, I saw a certain Arab who bought a thigh of meat from the market and carved a space in it that was a size necessary to allow for penetration. Subsequently, he penetrated it, roasted it, and ate it. This is insane. These incidents demonstrate that these particular non-Jewish people were suspected of immoral conduct with fowl.